that no, you can't say, okay, next time we'll get it right. When we have some outsider candidate come in who assembles people from across the aisle, and he's got a coalition of powerful people. He's got Elon Musk on board, the richest man in the world, who's going to reform government top to bottom. And instead we push through the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think secession has to be the real answer. But that doesn't mean I'm sorry that the Trump experiment wasn't taken. Like, that shot wasn't taken. I wanted it taken. Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
Good, sir. Hey, how have you been?
Good. What about you?
Excellent. Yeah, got that covered. Personality stuff. What are we going to talk about today?
First, I want to explain my wardrobe. So people may have noticed on the prior episode, at least those of you who watched the video, we played a clip from the previous one at that point, and it was hard to tell that it was a clip because I had the same shirt on, and so it kind of faded it in. And I just want to explain why that happens because, as folks may know, I have host several podcasts, and on two of the other ones, they have their customized backgrounds. And it's not that I go down to the local studio and each has a separate room and it's like, yes, this is the Bob Murphy Show, this is the Human Action Pocket. No, it's not like that. I have a green screen, and those people put it in. And for this one, I don't use a green screen. And so what that means is, of my polo shirts hanging in my closet, that I always grab the green ones for this show because I can't wear them for the other ones. And so to, maximize the permutations or whatever, to avoid repetition overall, that just makes sense to always use a green one for this one, because otherwise that boxes me in a corner for the other ones. And so then, of course, what happens is, since I really only have two go-to green shirts, that one comes up a lot, and it was just luck of the draw. And so I'm just going to deviate from that, and I'm just wearing a gray shirt. I could wear this in front of a green screen, but I choose to wear it now. I'm allowed to. And also, last thing I'll say is, because I am going to be very pessimistic and a party pooper, black-pilled in this, or gray-pilled, I suppose, I thought it makes sense to grab this shirt and not like one of my happier blue ones that sort of match my stunning eyes. So anyway, I think a lot of people were wondering about my shirts, and there I've probably given you more than you need to know.
Oh, that was a lot of words, Bob. And I think technically you did cover all of the issues. But we can simplify that a bunch by just directing people to thebobmurphyshow.com. And I think there's a donate button there or something. And maybe the good folks can kick you a few bucks. You can get some more
you can
shirts.
Specify. Yeah, it's like you go to church and you say, I want this to go to the missions. I don't want this to any local people. And you can do that same here.
Blacker shirts. All right. So you said you're going to be a little black-pilled. I'm on pins and needles. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so the premise of this episode, folks, was my idea, and then Adam helped me flesh it out. And so I thought, why don't we just take a stock survey of all the various strategies people have for advancing liberty, bringing freedom to the people, or getting liberty in your lifetime, those sorts of catchphrases. Because there are a bunch, and we interview different people, and some of us participate in some and then get burned out, and they switch to something else. And so I thought, why don't we just take stock of that and just catalog them, go through them, and try to neutrally, dispassionately give our assessment as to, hey, is this working or not? Not necessarily to give advice to the viewers in terms of here's what you should do, but just to give our opinion on stuff. Because I think it is important every once in a while, like if we were in a war, to occasionally check in. I remember reading commentary about the First World War, and there were a bunch of British admirals sitting around looking at reports and stuff about how much tonnage of merchants that the German U-boats were sinking. And one of the admirals just looks up and says, well, this means we're losing the war. And they were like, well, and then they changed the strategies, and they switched to a convoy system or something, whereas for some reason earlier they had just said, oh, no, that's not going to work. That's a bad idea. Anyway, and that's kind of, and for whatever reason that struck me, that he was like the only guy in the room that said that out loud, and that kind of broke the spell, and they realized we got to do something different. This isn't working, so anyway, that's
I think I understand what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could have given the analogy of how a baker running a bakery needs to take stock of things and look at their inventory and how much they're moving. But you went straight to World War One and dead sailors and sunken tons of merchandise and munitions.
And
you're
the people
wearing
all getting ready to starve. Yes, that's
and
right.
you're wearing a dark gray shirt. So, okay, I think I see where this is going.
So yeah, that's...
Tell us all about the types of liberty-achieving strategies that obviously can never work.
Okay, and by the way, I mean, I am going to be largely pessimistic, but that this need not be that, right? It's possible, and partly too, I'm hoping for pushback, right? So I'm just kind of telegraphing what my own views on some of this stuff are going to be, but clearly, folks, in the comments or on social media, whatnot, if you think that I'm being too pessimistic, by all means, or if you think we missed something, please bring it to our attention. And I don't know what Adam's going to say, right? So he and I brainstormed. We got a bunch of obvious things, then we grouped them up into various categories. So we've got 3 main categories of things we're going to cover, folks. The first category is just do it yourself. The second category is education/persuasion. And the third is politics. Okay, so that's what you're in store for. And it's going to be snappy. I think you're going to like it.
I think so, too. Yeah, if these categories don't make sense to you, blame me. I just came up with them on the fly, and they looked okay to Bob. So let's start with just do it yourself. And that's, I was thinking the principle, you can't wait for some other group to give you liberty. You're going to have to, if you want liberty, you're going to have to kind of make it happen yourself. So I'm thinking things like agorism, local voluntarism just in your own life, Bitcoin, expatriation, if you can flee to some place with a less oppressive regime, or I don't know, maybe Elon will give you a lift to Mars or something, and also homeschooling and the concept of free cities, like Prospero and Morzapan in Honduras, and maybe something like the Seasteading project that Patrice Friedman is excited about. And things, I'm sure there's other things. It's just what I was thinking of. Get yourself some liberty by making some liberty in your own life. What do you think about that, Bob?
Okay, so here, and again, folks, we got a lot to cover, so we're going to kind of do drive-bys on some of these things. Just my quick thoughts. So with just about all these things, it was that when I first heard of each of these, I was very excited, and then there was a lot of promise. And then just in practice, it's with a lot of this stuff, I'm not saying this is going to be true for literally everything, but a lot of these, part of the problem is just people, right? and it is what it is. And it's going to be like with a lot of these things where it's like, yeah, if you had the right kind of people and if they all did such and such and were super disciplined, it would work. But no, people fight and they have disagreements about stuff. And, so... for example, Bitcoin, right? So there was a lot of promise for that. It's funny. I kind of seesawed on that early on when somebody first, I won't say the guy's name in case he doesn't want me to mention him, but I remember there was a guy, that I met when I was in Auburn, Alabama at one point, and he was really early into Bitcoin. I mean, like right out of the gate, and was telling me about it. And I was just asking him questions, and I had determined that I thought, like, no, ultimately, like the government could still set up choke points, and it's not like everybody could just completely move off grid and the government would be helpless and couldn't totally stop that. Like early on, I figured, I concluded that it's not like a panacea, even though maybe it's still really cool. And then it really started taking off, and I've said this publicly that Tatiana Moroz was the one who encouraged me to go to a Bitcoin conference. This was early on. I think it was 2010, but I might be off on that. And I went and gave it time. I could look it up if I had time, if I had thought to prepare and look that up. But anyway, I gave a talk to the Texas Bitcoin Conference at one point, and that was the first one I went to. And she was right that the energy there, everybody was building stuff and they were optimistic, and it was just night and day compared to the typical libertarian event where everyone just, bitching and moaning about how bad everything is and how stupid everybody, you know what I mean? So it was really like, that was refreshing. And so I understood what she meant about that, and it was great. And, and it was rising. And as we're recording here, I mean, Bitcoin's hitting all-time highs again, right? So it's not that there's that element, but what the issue is, the concern among some people is that it's been co-opted. And here it's a huge fight, and that's part of my problem, or the point I'm making is Bitcoin originally was sold as, hey, nobody's in charge of it. Like people couldn't corrupt it if they wanted to. That's the essence. That's the beauty of this thing, is no one's in charge. It's decentralized. And then you had these wars that still arose, and you have Roger Ver's book co-written with Steve Patterson on Bitcoin being hijacked. And again, whether you agree with that or not, there's a ton of people that agree with them, and there's a ton of people that hate their guts and think they're liars or nuts. And so, and just for people who don't know, the controversy is that originally Bitcoin was supposed to be like a replacement for everyday money. And so it was like, yeah, you could go buy a cup of coffee just by transferring Bitcoins to somebody, and it won't scale. That's not going to work. And so now Bitcoin is being touted in its current form as like digital bars of gold that are stored in a vault in Switzerland or something, and that it's kind of going to be the layer one that backs up other things that are pyramided on top of it that serve as the data. Like people are effectively trading claims on the underlying Bitcoins on some different blockchain, right?
By this, you're referring to the Lightning Network and such things.
Yeah, things like that. So anyway, and there's reasons with all these controversies, like both sides have a point. I understand why people of goodwill who, an initial idea sounded great, and then as people piled into it and then worked on it for a few years, and they realized, oh, wait a minute, they had legitimate differences about strategy, or, well, no, we should take it this way. No, we should do this. And, and then they just start fighting with each other. And over time, it's, no, anybody who thinks this on this issue is a complete moron, blah, 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 or evil, or both. Okay, so I'm saying that's what's happened with Bitcoin, where it is, largely being, like, there's major investment bank stuff now into it. And so anyway, I think it's here to stay, and I am a fan of Bitcoin and so on, but I do understand, I think people who think this by itself is going to revolutionize the world in its current trajectory in terms of bringing freedom to everybody. I don't think as many people believe that as was the case 10 years ago. Okay. Anyway, do you want, maybe I'll just stop it because I know I was talking for a bit. Do you want to say anything on Bitcoin per se before we keep going? Folks, let's take a break from the action for this important announcement. I've been promoting the upcoming Expat Money Show, which is October 10th through 12th, for a few weeks now. We're getting into crunch time. And I have to say, with everything that's been going on lately in the United States, getting a plan B is even more important now than you would have thought before. So particularly if you're somebody who's blessed financially, I really encourage you, don't come up with excuses for why you don't need to do this. For example, you might be thinking, well, we got to make our stand in the United States, and if we just run away, then we've conceded. And that's not a good strategy. That's not a good argument. I asked Mikkel Thorpe that very question, that objection, when he was on the Bob Murphy Show as a guest, and he pointed out that, for example, the truckers in Canada, when they were having all their bank accounts and whatnot shut down, the people who were based, had their headquarters somewhere else, had a home base of operations that put them in a stronger position to fight the tyranny of their government where they lived, that they had that alternate plan B set up. And so likewise with you, it doesn't mean if you set these things up that you need to go move there and never come back, but it's good to have options, okay? And what's great about the upcoming Expat Money Show Summit is that they are not charging you for this. They're going to give you an introduction to all the different things you got to think about, and then if you want to pursue any of these topics, you can do so. Okay, so there's really no commitment besides your time. I'm going to be tuning in when I can. So it's from October 10th through 12th. You're going to learn how to legally protect your wealth, secure second residencies and citizenships, reduce your tax burden, and own property abroad. Okay, the focus this year is on Latin America, where there's a lot going on. Again, Plan B, it's no longer optional, it's essential. Reserve your free ticket at expatmoneysummit.com. Once again, go to expatmoneysummit.com. It's October 10th through 12th. The clock is ticking here. Go ahead and sign up. No commitment except your time. I think you'll find it worthwhile. Okay, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, quickly. I don't think you said anything wrong.
That's good.
Or I wouldn't tell you if I did. I a couple of thoughts. One is, like, if we suddenly did have a free market in money and competing currencies, like the thing you talked about the split between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and all these other arguments, I think you'd see stuff like that in a decentralized market if it existed, especially in the early days. So I'm not that worried about that. I certainly agree that the panacea aspect isn't going to pan out. It's not going to just bring liberty, but I like the blockchain element. I like some of the technological aspects, and I like the fact that it hasn't gone away and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. Means that people will think that tools like this can be used in unique ways that used to require a government. So I'm sort of glad it's just out there as a use case. I think it's a good piece of the puzzle. I'm cautiously white-pilled about it, even if it doesn't, end up being the money or whatever.
Yeah. So maybe I guess we're orange-pilled, right? I that probably came off too hard because I agree with that. And even the stuff that I do at Infidio, which is like my day job, folks, it's not what we're doing right now, but I can see like what we're doing now is going to give us stepping stones. And then, down the road, I've given talks on this stuff. I think I was at Oklahoma State when I first gave a talk on this. The idea of I would call them like judge bots or something, right? That you could have smart contracts deployed and just people around the world, and they could, they have some agreement they want to make with each other, and then you have some blockchain somewhere, and there's an AI system with smart contracts and blah, 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 and they can each just lock up somewhere, the amount to be paid upon performance, and then this decentralized thing decides whether the other party complied with the terms, right? And you could just do stuff like, so it would kind of bring a rule of law to lots of people around the world, even if their local governments wouldn't enforce those contracts. And so I think that has a potential for, being huge as well. But that per se is not going to stop, some government from coming and, burning your house down or throwing you in a cage, right? So I'm just saying with a lot of these things, I think some of the early proponents of this stuff, a lot of these thought, this is it right here. This is the magic bullet. And the more you get in the trenches and realize like, no, it's not going to be a magic bullet.
Yeah, definitely not. But like even the stable coin, which doesn't have any particular, this will make us free use case. It does allow people to exchange dollars without going through any network, right?
Yeah.
That's got to be useful in areas where either people are unbanked or their government is a problem, or it is just sort of nice to have a thing that just zips right by potential roadblocks and lack of intermediarity problems, and that's just the technology that we have now. I think it's pretty exciting.
Oh, and I meant to text you and I forgot, Adam. I wanted to add things like Uber and even just some like UPS or whatever, but Uber's a better example, or Airbnb, I suppose, of just, using technology to do things and sort of get around the old ossified government system.
Yeah.
So I think Jeff Dice is the first person I heard make this point. I don't know if he stole it from somebody else or just, this was his insight, but saying, libertarians have been writing stuff for decades on the problems with government monopoly or cartels, whatever you want to call it, for taxi cab, the medallion system in New York City and whatever, and how much those things would sell for, and how bad it restricts quantity and raises prices and the qualities, blah, blah, blah. And then Uber just comes in and just goes around that and just did way more to show the average person this is what open competition in, transportation services looks like. And so and that did way more than any white paper from Cato or whatever, right? So, and I think with Bitcoin too, likewise, everybody now understands, oh yes, you could have privately produced money. They might still think the government is better for various reasons or fair or whatever, but now it's not just like, oh, money has to be produced by government. Everybody knows that's not the case anymore. So clearly that's great. But again, so with all this stuff though, I guess I would say Bitcoin is like Uber, but with something more important than just getting from A to B, right? But it's not that anybody, I think, thought, oh yeah, once Uber hits the scene, say goodbye, statism, your days are numbered. Like, no, it's just, oh yeah, life's a lot better with Uber than before.
Would you feel comfortable putting Uber and things like it, especially in the early days before the government like knew they were there. Would you call that like agorism and voluntarism? Because I would. I think this is getting around the medallion system and all the other stuff.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good place to, yeah, that's a good umbrella. That was one of our labels that we had there, folks. Okay, yeah.
And getting back to the other things on our little list, free cities and seasteading is a little different because there's a politics aspect.
Well, can I, so the seasteading one, yeah, that one is the biggest disappointment in my mind is I wrote a novel in grad school. It wasn't about seasteading per se, but it was about an island, and anyway, you carry that train of thought, and I was imagining like cruise ships just getting bigger and bigger and whatever, and so eventually like floating cities and things like that. And anyway, I recently had Patrick Friedman on the Bob Murphy show, and he's pivoted, and that's we'll talk about. Are we covering that? Oh, yeah, free cities. Okay, so I'll do both real fast. So he pivoted away from seasteading. That was his baby, and he'd been working on it for years, and I just hadn't heard from him in a while. And like I had checked in with him, I don't know, like 10 years ago or something, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there's this like engineering issue, right? There was just some practical problem." And so then I checked in with him more recently, thinking, "Well, surely they've solved that thing by now, right?" And I don't know if they had or not, but that wasn't the issue. He moved on, and it basically came down to the economics of it, ironically enough, that he was just saying, no, I mean, it's really expensive to, or rather, you don't appreciate the convenience of land. To put it, you know what I mean? Like, if you have to go create your land on floating water, like it's really expensive in terms of how much you have to spend, per square foot of surface area. And that, it makes sense to do it on an oil rig or something where you just have this very dense, product that you're bringing to the surface. But in terms of just having a bunch of tax accountants go out and be floating around or on some floating platform or whatever, or if it's moored to the seafloor to get away from the income taxers, like, no, it just doesn't work. Particularly because, you wouldn't want to go move out there, you'd have to platoon them or something. So anyway, and he was coming up with saying like it could conceivably work like for medical tourism, right? Like if there's some cruise ship or some platform somewhere, and then, you had heart surgeons just rotated and did like 1 month shifts because it wouldn't be very fun to live there. And then, everybody who needs the heart surgeries goes there, and it's, for a fraction of the cost because there's no regulations in international waters, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That conceivably could work, but it's not that you could just generalize that and say, people could go build cars there. They could go do, like I said, be a CPA and just go do it there, and then you won't get taxed. It's not worth it. It's too expensive to have people go live on a thing floating in the ocean somewhere. So anyway, so that was that element. And then, kind of all the more so with Mars, and they like, if you think it's expensive to build a platform, 100 miles off the coast, imagine trying to go to the moon. Like, at least there's an atmosphere here. Like, so, or like, oh, why don't we just all go to Iceland? I mean, no government's going to follow us there. Well, because it would suck. And guess what? Iceland's way more hospitable than Mars is, right? So, and it's closer. So anyway, there's just things like that. So I'm not ruling it out in the year 2200 or something that there might be, but I'm just saying it's in terms of like the practical difficulty. I think people sometimes underestimate. I think real quickly on the free city stuff. So again, this came up when I had, Patreon. So he pivoted, and he was saying there's various governments around the world that are open to the idea of, some outside investors coming in, and they strike a deal, and they, maybe they amend their constitution or whatever, and then you have a zone of relative freedom. And he was saying this is important because you get, there's a lot that comes with being under the, umbrella of a sovereign state instead of just being a no man's land. And that, there's a lot that happens there that you'd like to get. And so they had this company or organization called Prospera, and they were in Honduras, and it was looking good for a bit. But let me just, good AI summary. I typed in Prospera Honduras lawsuit, and the thing that pops up is an arbitration lawsuit is ongoing between Prospera, a U.S.-based company, and the government of Honduras after Honduras repealed a law that had enabled the creation of autonomous private charter cities. Prospera is seeking $10.8 billion in damages through an international tribunal. Okay, so it's not dead. And if Prospera wins in this, then it's great, right? But the point is, like, the first real big example they had of this, what happened is then the people just elected, some far left candidate who hated, everything Prospera stood for. I was like, what? We're not going to tolerate this. And, and so, and there's a thing, I'm sorry, I'm taking too long on this, Adam, but where Patrick was pointing out, they had all this stuff about, like, putting the assets. There's a thing where the Honduras government, if they lose this lawsuit, it's like all of their assets that are related to other countries or things can be directed towards it, right? So there's this kind of interesting thing where they can pull out of those international, I forget what the term was, they can pull out of that system if they want to, so going forward, their assets aren't in danger that, if the international arbitration agrees with this lawsuit, then, Honduras checking accounts that are based in other countries can get seized and whatnot. But then other governments don't want to do business with them, including the Chinese Communist Party. Apparently, like they were trying to, cook up some deal where the Chinese were going to give Honduras some investment to, do infrastructure or whatever. And the Chinese communists were like, no, you have to be part of this international system where, if we to say you reneged on this loan we're going to give to you, then we have some recourse. And so anyways, it's kind of funny. Okay, so anyway, but you can see, I hope people can get why, that's not great that the real first big test of this, the government then turns on them down the road and they have a $10.8 billion lawsuit that's pending.
Yeah, I've been there, visited briefly on the Tom Woods cruise, and they're still going. I wish them well, but having that choke point of being reliant on the host government is very worrying. And there's different use cases that have better and worse.
Can I ask you? I guess I didn't realize you had been there. Like, how big is it?
Very small. It's on Roatan, which is an island right off of mainland Honduras, and it's just a small piece of land on that island. A few commercial buildings and one impressive for the island, large high-rise that's both residential and commercial. They're being restricted a little bit because of this lawsuit.
Did you sell a kidney while you were there? Is that how you paid for the cruise?
Yeah, obviously. Joke's on them. It wasn't even my kidney. And my impression of that is these things are great. I wish them well. I hope people that are young and industrious can take a flyer on things like this, and I hope it works out. But much like with the seasteading, it just seems like it's a little bit early when you were discussing the economics of it. Like, things would have to get really, really, really bad on the mainland of all governments for seasteading to make sense financially. And even then, you'd have to fight off, raids from the mainland if some government decided that you were under their jurisdiction or something. But I'm just generally in favor of anybody trying to float a balloon as to how you can get more freedom in this statist world. So I wish them well. But I wouldn't invest in it because the Honduran government is more socialist than it is freedom loving. So how do you invest money there? It just seems risky.
Yeah. By the way, I'm glad you said. Obviously, in case we haven't bent over backwards, I'm not here trying to criticize anybody or whatever. And I'm glad everyone's trying all these different things, and we'll just see what happens. But I'm just trying to also be honest, like I say, that it's like when the admiral, again, this story, I'm probably exaggerating what it actually said, and I misremember, but assuming that some version of the story I told is true, the admiral going, well, we're losing the war. It wouldn't be, so you just think that our captains are a bunch of babies, or you aren't applauding the efforts of our sailors or something, or all those merchantmen that got sunk, you just think that they're idiots. It's like, no, I'm just saying I don't know that this is going to work, so. And
in both Prospero and Morazan, the other one, I mean, they're in operation and people are receiving the benefits of a tiny little oasis of relatively improved freedom within the governmental structure of Honduras. So it is working for a lot of people right now. I mean, depending on what you mean by a lot, you have to look up the numbers of people that live and work there.
And they have medical tourism, right? So it's not even just the people there, but
they have all sorts of
people
things.
People are flowing through there, right? And just getting...
You get more of that, I think, in Prospera. I think mostly it's more local-oriented people living there in the other one. They're not identical, as of course they wouldn't be. They're creating their own legal structure, basically. But in general, it seemed to me like this is either a thing for the young who want to take a flyer, or maybe they have their best use cases in the future. I wish them well. But when you think just do it for yourself, like the agorism part, I think that's huge. Just make yourself a little bit more free by sort of opting out of whatever the government structures. I consider homeschooling a part of that. You know, you can micro school with your friends and neighbors and just, get your kids out of the propaganda machine that is a government school. And I think that of our three categories here, I like that one the best, just because you can immediately make yourself more free if you just make the decision to do it. And we have expatriation on there too. I don't have much to say about that. Mikkel Thorpe probably would, and Tom Woods at this point, but I don't have
Yeah, can we just, not to blow through the homeschooling too quickly? I mean, yeah, I think in terms of like personal happiness and, influencing things you can control, yeah, with this stuff that, raising your kids the way you want to raise them and whatnot. And it doesn't necessarily need to be just homeschooling per se, but just in general, like it's not letting them watch TV programs,
sure,
or whatever,
yeah.
going to church, or just,
Yeah.
and it's,
getting them off social media.
I think it was it Jeff Dyson? I'm going to be quoting a lot of Jeff Dyson. These little things are about, but he said something a few years ago about like right now with our culture, the most like revolutionary avant-garde thing you can do is to get married young and have a bunch of kids.
That sounds
you know
like
what I mean?
Jeff.
Like that offends
Yeah.
people, and so anyway, and I think that's right. And so, I guess you could say, well, the downside is you don't sleep a lot and you don't have a bunch of, spare money or something, but okay, that's fine. So you can do stuff like that. But to be fair in terms of the other criteria that, that the way I'm judging other things too, you can say, yeah, that's great, but certainly, you just do that with your family. That's not going to change like the course of history per se. And with a lot of these things, again, it's kind of like, well, yeah, if 30% of the population did that, that would totally work. But if it's not, then, so the same kind of thing here that, yeah, obviously do that and make sure that, your kids understand, the important stuff or whatever. They're not going to obviously be your clones and go just do whatever you say, and you wouldn't want them to. But in any event, that's, there's like a little thing where at least for the first few years, they actually think you know a lot and care what you think and want to be like you. It's amazing. By teenager years, they get over that. Don't get me wrong. But anyway, so sure, if you're complaining that, hey, no one's listening to my great ideas or the fate of this country, well, your kids would. And so go ahead and focus on that. But anyway, again, just repeating myself. So I think in terms of, yes, your time spent on that is well spent and whatever, but that by itself is not going to, arrest the slide if that's what you perceive to be happening.
Well, not to worry, Bob. We have two more areas. The first was just do it yourself, and the second one, we're all about it. This is education and persuasion. And here I'm thinking about writing, lecturing, podcasting, things you're very familiar with.
In terms of education and persuasion, would like a commercial fit into that?
I mean, it would if it were the right kind of company.
Okay, but I mean, we talked about homeschool. Like, what about it was like a family thing? Like, is there something that like can blend all that together?
I mean, if you could combine a business and a family with a great commercial and waterfowl, I think you'd end up with this great company. I don't know if you've heard of them, Bob. I think you have. I've mentioned it before. It's the Swan Brothers, who do this amazing merch branding, clothing, embroidery, swag production outfit. Have I mentioned these guys to you?
I've heard of it, yes. Mm-hmm.
They're amazing. And again, I think it's either true or it isn't that you're going to be fiduciarily irresponsible if you're in charge of some school or some church or some business and you're not using the Swan Brothers to get your brand awareness up and using them to do your merch and your employees' uniforms if they do such things. And if you've got some event coming up and you want to promote it, maybe fundraise off of it, the Swan Brothers are great for that. They will build for you a merch store that is just slick as all heck. They will guide you through the whole process. You don't even have to do anything. Just give them your artwork. And if you don't know how to draw, just describe your artwork. They'll even take care of that for you. They're pretty great. Just go to theswanbrothers.com/cross for these crossovers, and they will get your swag game up and running.
Yes. So in terms of doing it yourself with others, Agorism, go ahead and do it.
theswanbrothers.com/cross.
Be the change you want to see on coffee mugs. All right. Education and persuasion. So, this is broadly construed. We can even include memes in this.
Yes.
And I'm not even saying that sarcastically, that
yes,
I think some memes have done way more in the last 5 years than, any individual book that I've written.
Richard Dawkins was right.
Yes.
So yeah, we're talking about writing, books, podcasting, memes, but even more so, I think we'll be well on our way when we have non-ham-fisted libertarian themes in art and movies and music and TV shows and books. And then I don't know if you think this is worth talking about, but as we educate, do you have an opinion about the Minarchism versus Anarchism spectrum or schism, or I don't know how you want to think about it?
Well, I do, but maybe just let me spend a moment just on the education question per se, and then I want to pursue that with you. So that's obviously where I landed myself, and my view is all these other things. The people who go into these various strategies, like, they have to believe in liberty and understand what is it that we're trying to get. Like, what would success even look like, and why are we even on this team, as it were? And so for me, just given what I think my skill set is and whatever, I thought, that's kind of where I'm going to focus on. Not because, with all these things, right? Like, if everyone just sat around writing economics books and doing podcasts on comparative advantage, that wouldn't work, right? But again, these other things, like, people wouldn't even know that we want to go do agorisms, do X, Y, and Z if, like, they never read a book explaining this is what a free society would look like, right? So it's kind of that trade-off. So I would say that. Let me just be the pessimist first, and then I do want to pursue your questions. So even on this one, though, again, it's like I'm not as optimistic now as I used to be that there was a period like where Austrian economics was really making advances. And like when I was at NYU, I remember people were the wisdom, the career advice that if you wanted to go into academic economics in the United States, at least, you wanted to teach for a living, and that's what you wanted to be, a tenured college professor somewhere. The advice they gave was, do not advertise your Austrianness on your CV. And it was like a stealth strategy. And they said, just get it, like, do your dissertation on something boring and whatever, like, try to get something that doesn't, you can tolerate, but, don't do whatever, Murray Rothbard's 8 best reasons for anarchism or something, or even Ludwig von Mises' time preference theory. And so they said that, and then the idea was to get your foot in the door somewhere. And then once you get tenure, then finally you can go, surprise, I'm Austrian, right? And that was truly the strategy they taught. And then over time it switched. Like during my career, I just know, because I'm close with a lot of these guys that come out of GMU or whatever, and it's just like a factory cranking out people and placing them. And at some point it switched where there had been enough people going to these outposts sort of as undercover agents or whatever terminology you want to use. And then over time they had enough of a foothold where now they were hiring. So now the strategy switched, and they were telling young PhD students who liked Austrian economics, you need to advertise that you're an Austrian so these outposts can find you, right? Because there are, obviously it's a minority, but the point is now there's enough of us out there who are older that have, broken the glass ceiling or whatever goofy metaphor you want to use, that we need to find you. And so you got to advertise who you are so that you can get spots at them and they'll interview you and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that was great, and so I was really excited. But and after the financial crisis in 2008, my phone was ringing off the hook. And lots of people, and I was going around and I was showing them Austrian business cycle theory. I wasn't calling it that, but I was showing, and they were like, "Oh yeah, yeah." And I think now, like, just with Trumpism and MMT, because I think the Austrians kind of got drowned out, and we're at the point where, the average, like, MAGA type does not trust college economics professors at all, and I don't blame them.
Sure.
It's kind of like, I imagine it would be like if you were a pediatrician, and then like more and more of the young parents coming in, like, didn't want any vaccines at all, and like if you said, well, if you got a headache, you want some Tylenol, and they were like, what? They're never coming back, And I don't even research this, right? So for all I know, that's all totally correct and everything. But I'm just saying, I can imagine a lot of physicians say, look, just because a lot of my colleagues like lied through their teeth and took money from Big Pharma for the COVID stuff, you can't just, and it's anyway. I think it's kind of like that with that. And I was like, yes, I know a lot of economists are completely full of it. They have these ridiculous models. And when I went to grad school, we studied models where the agents in the model don't even hold money. Sure, but on the other hand, tariffs are really stupid, right? So like we've known this, since the 1800s or 1700s, anyway. So that's kind of, I know I was going off on a bit there, but I like after 2008, I remember thinking this with the bank bailouts, or you know what I mean, all that stuff, and just seeing how quickly Republicans just, if the stock market crashes and Hank Paulson gets on TV and tells everybody that your bank account is not going to work next week and your life insurance policy is going to get canceled unless we bail out all these companies and do TARP and blah, and everyone was, okay, and just completely folded, Glenn Beck included, and then later he tried to get out. It was like, no, what are you talking about? You were supporting of it. So anyway, like that's when I realized we have done nothing in terms of like the free market economy. Yeah, like Republicans talk about tax cuts over, but no, the average rank and file Republican in fall of 2008, government is the solution, not the problem. And so that's when I realized, oh wow, I thought we had done a better job educating the mass, like not the masses, the foot soldiers and the right wing or whatever. And in other words, I knew they were bad on foreign policy and the whole torture thing, but I thought at least they know that, if there's a bad economy, having the government come in and save everybody, that's not a good idea. No, they didn't know that. If it's a Republican in the White House, that's probably a good idea. So anyway, and it's been downhill from there. That it's, like I said, to the point where Republicans are, take over Intel? Yeah, why wouldn't you want it? That's good return for the taxpayer. Of course, that's a smart move. Wait.
Yeah, that Pfizer and Intel thing is disappointing. We got to get you a darker colored shirt to reflect your pilledness. I get everything you're saying. I'm going to offer this little snippet of a white pill, like much like the fighting in Bitcoin is sort of what I would think would be natural if we were starting to get a free market in money. I think there's way more libertarians than there are now than there were, 50 years ago. Way more. And way more Austrian economists, way more people who are receptive at least, both in numerical numbers and as a percentage of the population. And I think that even though we're getting reflexive reaching to exercise government power from the right, because it's been done to them from the left, even in the area of economics and free markets and all that, this populist thing. I think what we're seeing now is a system in crack-up. The regime is not trusted by the right, at least, and by the middle. And I think that crack-up is going to make people look really confused for a long time. And something truly horrible might come out of that period of intense flux. But one of those things might be free markets based on Austrian theory. We just don't know that. To give you an intuition to make you feel better, channel Michael Malice when he talks about the destruction of the Soviet Union. It seemed impossible until all of a sudden it happened. And I think this is like that. since our ideas are out there and who knows who's listening to them, once things get goofy and bad enough and enough people think that what the regime is saying when they say, trust me and give me charge of government power, I'll make it better. When that doesn't happen, eventually I'm hoping people will look around and go, oh, well, maybe we just need to make this whole thing smaller, and order will emerge from the bottom up rather than the top down, and maybe those libertarians were right after all. So I get my white pilledness from the fact that the system is broken such that it can change, even though it might well go in a worse direction. We don't know, but it could go in a great direction. That's in the field of possibilities.
Okay, I know we have other stuff to get through, so I don't want to get bogged down too much on this. Right, I'm not arguing with you just because, no, I want to make it work. But even there, like, the more I read, like reading Scott Horton's stuff on just how bad the transition was, and like with all of the
oh yeah,
what do they call those guys? Shoot,
the Harvard boys.
Well, yeah, right. But what the kleptocrats in Russia, what do they call the oligarchs? Was that the term, or is there some other more Russian specific?
That's the one I use. Yeah.
Okay, that I knew people used to throw those terms, but I never really looked into, in like Scott's chapter. I guess it was from Provoked. He let me read it just to make sure the economics made sense and everything. I didn't realize how bad it was.
It's terrible. Yeah.
And just like some of the corruption in terms of huge companies just being gifted to people for like pennies on the dollar and just crazy stuff. And anyway, like the increase in or the decrease in life expectancy over a short period of time and whatever. Like I kind of knew, like, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, and then they were open to ideas from the West, and I thought, okay, great, we're going to send some people over there, teach them about free markets, and they're going to privatize some stuff, and this should be great, right? And maybe some bumps in the road. And no, it was bad. And certainly it's not like the average person in Russia right now, I think, is a fan of Ludwig von Mises, because we learned so much from the Harvard guys that came over, and the transition was so awesome, and yay capitalism. So yes, they're not in a gulag, and it's better now than it was. But in terms of like the triumph of liberty in the long run, I don't know that that's going to pop out of that. So
you need to read more science fiction. Like when I think of the long run, I'm thinking, the year 3000 or whatever, maybe 4000.
Well, you could, in the Bible, it says in the long run, eventually Jesus comes back, and then yes, we have.
Well, what are you worried about then?
Well, I'm not. But I mean, I guess we anticipate. That's partly where I was going to go with all this, is to say, this is why you need Jesus, folks. And that to me, it's like, I actually am optimistic. And you say, well, what's the point, Bob? You're such a, everything sucks. And it's, well, because, I think there's supernatural deus ex machina coming at the end. But anyway, I can flip it too and say, if you're a, secular libertarian and you still have hope, I think you're fooling yourself. So you don't realize what you're up against. So I put it that way.
Yeah, but I don't put my whole ego into winning this fight. Every day's a gift, and there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, just like Ludwig von Mises was a champion and stuff, even though according to his own value system. Okay, do you want? So I kept ignoring your question. Do you want to return to the Minarchism versus Anarchism thing?
Yeah, I mean, just real quick. I think a lot of people fight about it, and it's kind of dumb. I think if we're talking about persuading towards liberty, you just want to make the argument that the state should be smaller, the sphere of its influence should be less, and the sphere of private influence should be greater. And anybody who's interested in, reading libertarian theory, political philosophy, and whatnot can make the distinction as to how small that government sphere ought to be, and whether it makes sense for a minarchy, if that could be stable, that's great. But if you're just trying to move things in the right direction, just move things in the right direction without arguing about whether we must win the argument about whether a small state or no state is the thing. I think from where we're at right now, just talking to people and persuading. Again, I think a lot of this stuff should be done in movies, not white papers, in which case, you should never even be saying these words. You should be showing a world that operates in a certain way with more private autonomy and less authority.
Yeah. So on the don't let me forget to come back to the movie stuff. Okay, but on the Minarchism versus Anarchism, my quick position on that stuff is, and I think my own career has kind of shown that early on, I was like, I wrote chaos theory and everything, and that was kind of my deal. And then I rarely write about that stuff. Now, I mean, it's partly because I'm not a tenured college professor, so there's not too many firms in the financial sector that are paying someone to be, an anarcho-capitalist theorist, right? But beyond that, though, it's partly for what you're saying, that to me, rhetorically, the reason it's critical to have a really rock solid, like, this is how a totally free society would work, and right, you don't need the state for anything, including protecting us from nukes and putting serial killers in cages, and a private voluntary sector can handle all that stuff way more effectively, humanely, than the state could. If you don't trust the state with making cars, why would you trust them with telling you who murderers are? Like, that seems kind of a bad idea, right? So anyway, for all those, I think it's important, largely just for a rhetorical effect, that if you're arguing with like a big state person and you're telling them, oh yeah, these welfare programs are bad and this and that, and you can't, or bomb in Iraq, you can't trust these killers, these guys are cold-blooded, all this stuff, and then it's like, oh, but we can trust them with these other things, right? And so it seems kind of inconsistent, like the arguments for why you want to shrink the government 20%, if you do have this reserved thing of, oh, but these really important functions, then yes, these politicians that we call bumbling fools and philanderers and liars and killers in this other sector, now on this stuff, all of a sudden we trust them with this stuff, right? So to me, that seems kind of untenable, and so that's why I think it's very logically fulfilling and satisfactory to say, yeah, if you want, we can do it. But yes, if I'm writing an op-ed or something, or if I'm going to be on Tucker Carlson's show, I'm probably not going to be there making the case for anarchism. Like, that's not the venue for that. And also, I don't even call myself an anarchist anymore. Partly, look, we were reviewing the G.K. Chesterton thing because there is that association that they think you mean something else. But also, since I'm Christian, I just said, there's a sense in which I'm a monarchist. Like, I have a king, so it's kind of weird that I'm calling myself an anarchist. So there you go.
Fair enough. You did not want me to let you forget about movies.
Right. And so I think that, the popular culture, that's a place where libertarian, for lack of a better term, in terms of what we're talking about, just gets crushed. And it's better now than it was before. But I mean, it was just such a given that in Hollywood movies and things, you and me growing up at it, that the corporations were always the villains and whatever. Like, to me, that was the amazing thing of The Big Short, was that they had people betting against the housing market were the heroes in that movie. I was like, this is amazing. They had to cast like a bunch of hunks and everything to make it work, but still, I was like, that's amazing. That normally that wouldn't, it's not like Michael Douglas or Danny DeVito and other people's money were considered, the start, like the heroes, right? They saw that company was way overvalued, and it would make more sense to rip it up and sell the pieces off to the highest bidder.
I still love Danny DeVito's speech at the end of that movie. I think that's just great.
So would you say, who cares? Is that what he said? Something?
Yeah.
I mean, amongst other things, he didn't.
In response to, Gregory Peck, or is that the guy? Yeah.
So, but I want to clarify too. I don't just mean like someone explicitly setting out to write a libertarian novel or a movie, like
It's
even like the Godfather, the scene where Michael says, "Now who's being naive, Kay?" I think that scene did more for convincing the average American that politicians murder people than anything that any expose or something that Alex Jones could have done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even though that was fictional, but it was just like the movie was so authentic and like cutting edge and hardcore and like, this is how the world works, right? And then they have that, and it's like, oh yeah, I mean, I know that. I'm not naive. Yeah, I know that senators kill people. So anyway.
All right, let us find ourselves a shirt made for you from a material from another dimension called Ultra, Ultra, Ultra Black, because we're going to move away from just do it yourself and education, persuasion, into our third little bucket of how do we achieve liberty called politics. And in here we threw secession, my personal favorite, the Free State Project, the Libertarian Party or any other minor party, joining a major party, Republicans or Democrats, and trying to make them more libertarian, forming coalitions for good state legislation, or national, I guess, school choice, defend the guard. Should we focus on the federal or the local level? I think you were in a fugue state when you wrote out ethno-state and the helicopter solution. And here you were really onto something. Maybe we can put our trust in a benevolent dictator. And I think we agree, Bob, that if it's not Baron Trump, I don't want it to be anybody. He's tall. His name is Trump. Come on.
His name is Baron?
Yeah.
So
His name is Baron. So what else do you want? I don't mind living in a barony. That sounds exotic. And then,
I mean, when he gets married, it'll be to the Baroness. Like
that's right. Who doesn't want a Baroness involved in their life? And then I just had a thought. I don't know when to say it. Let's talk about all those other things first.
Okay. All right. Maybe focusing on like getting some Liberty Republicans in there, that kind of thing, or not even Liberty Republic, but just like, you got to have a major candidate. These third parties, you're wasting your vote. You got to, Ron Paul showed he did the most and he ran for probably. Trump is like shaking up the system and da-da-da-da. Okay. I'm just going to put it this way. There could not be a better shot at this outsider coming in who's a billionaire, who has outside his own financing or whatever, coming in, just taking the arrows of the corporate press and whatever, and just emerging unscathed, amazingly, things that would have taken down, he had like 9 different things that should have taken him down, including a bullet, and just coming through and doing all this, assembling people, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard and stuff, and the second term especially, where he really had a shot. He had a bunch of the Silicon Valley people and whatever behind him. And I mean, he freed Ross. I don't ever want to minimize the importance of that. But I mean, on issue after issue, and like in particular, like the Epstein thing, I'm not even saying they needed to do anything about it, but they could have just not talked about it. And when people say, what about the Epstein? They say, you know what, we're dealing with the situation in Gaza right now, and there's this and that. That's terrible what happened to those girls, but at this point, that it's not going to undo that. Whatever. But not what they did. And he said, we're talking about Epstein. What do you care about? This is a hoax. I mean, it's just, I can't believe they handled it that way. And then you keep having all these things. Well, okay, at least he's, not as war hungry or whatever as Biden would have been. And the more that continues, it's like, I don't know. And now they're blowing up there. Did you see the latest thing? Now they've switched and said, oh, you know how we've been blowing boats? We're going to take it to land too, because now these narco terrorists, they've got wise to us, and they're not shipping it in boats, to go 1,100 miles in a little speedboat to Miami.
As we've said before, this is obviously a pretense to do a regime change in Venezuela, as they've wanted to do for a long time. But I got to stop you before you kill yourself, Bob. People who thought Trump was going to come in and save things didn't take the problem seriously enough. It was impossible that could have happened. But him winning and the things that he tried, even though they didn't work, and to the extent that he tried them, these are to the good, for the purpose of waking up the public, making the next run at it, which is also going to fail, more likely. It's much better than if Kamala Harris had won. We'd be in a worse situation. So I think that if you were disappointed that Trump didn't save us, you just shouldn't have thought that was ever going to happen. The swamp is really, really, really big and powerful, and Trump's not our hero. That's just not who he is. He's a big clumpy doofus who came in and knocked the mask off a bunch of lizard people, and that helps.
Yeah. Also, too, with what they did with Massey, or are doing with him. Again, I could totally get it if they were just like, he doesn't understand. Like, it would be great to be. You know what, though? If if everybody were Thomas Massey, he wouldn't be in this mess, right? He could have handled it like that and just, painted him as like Mr. Magoo or something, or like, oh, Thomas, okay, you're going to have your principles, but here we're over here governing. But instead to just vilify him and to try, to threaten him and whatever and say we're going to primary you and all. I mean, it's just, anyway.
But there's a flip side. That's kind of good because you don't want people to think that populism around a demagogue is the right idea. You don't want people to worship Trump and hope he gets a third term. You would, the state is awful. And it's almost good that he treats Massey so clumsily in his evil.
But, I mean, fair enough. But I guess my point is, for people who thought that was a possible avenue, I'm just trying to show that, no, you can't say, okay, next time we'll get it right. When we have some outsider candidate come in who assembles people from across the aisle, and he's got a coalition of powerful people. He's got Elon Musk on board, the richest man in the world, who's going to reform government top to bottom. And instead we push through the big, beautiful bill. When he could have easily taken all that momentum and done some, incredible stuff, and he didn't. And instead just squandered much of it. So that's kind of what I'm... And so, anyway,
but if you were going to
underscore it, like you and I were never, I wrote my Texas secession thing years ago. This because I thought, there's no way to do. But I'm just saying, I actually held my tongue, not because I thought Trump was the savior of humanity, but I was thinking, I might look a little bit whiny if right now I'm saying, no, guys, I'm saying secession's the only thing because. Like when Trump is crushing people, and look at these guys, Elon coming to doing Doge, and let's see what's going on here. This is talking about getting rid of the Department of Education, that I kept my mouth shut, and then now I feel comfortable saying, this isn't working, guys. This isn't, so.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think secession has to be the real answer, but that doesn't mean I'm sorry that the Trump experiment wasn't taken, like that shot wasn't taken. I wanted it taken. And I want the next one taken, even though I think it's going to lose. And all those things we listed, Free State Project, Libertarianism, or the Libertarian Party trying to do its thing. I'm happy with people pushing on all these levers, hoping we get somewhere. But if you ask me in my heart of hearts, what's going to make more liberty long-term for the most people, it's not going to be the use of state power. It's going to be the shrinking of it. And I think secession is probably our most likely bet. But I think the system has to crack a whole bunch before that happens.
Okay,
and
so
this is part of that, yeah.
Let me relieve myself on this idea too. And again, because I'm just being fair here. My point with all this stuff, folks, again, is to say, like when you first hear, it's like, oh yeah, that could work, and let's have some of our good people in that. And then just over time, I was, oh man, this is going to be harder than we thought. So likewise here. Again, I wrote a pamphlet on secession that I had decided years ago. I think one of it's not that this pushed me over the edge, Adam, but it was like the thing I said, what, I really have to write this is when they had two different national anthems at a football game or something.
Yeah, I wrote about
that. And I was just like, there are two countries. Like, what more do you need? So anyway.
My line on that was, why so stingy? We could get more national anthems, couldn't we?
Okay, so anyway, this is a headline from, or an article, I should say, from January 11th, 2024. Texas Supreme Court won't take up secessionist groups' push to get Texit measure on GOP ballot. And so what had happened is, the Texas National Movement, and I've had, their president, Daniel Miller, at least once, possibly twice on the Bob Murphy show, talking to him, and and when this stuff was ongoing, was in the thick of it, I was rooting for him and I was hoping it was going to work. So the deal was they were trying to get a secession measure just on the primary ballot for the GOP in Texas, the state level. And the GOP chairman blocked it. And Daniel told me that they had, internal polling and stuff they were doing. And they said, the reason the Republican Party is not going to let this get on the ballot, or it's not even the primary ballot, just to be clear for everybody. It's not like in the general election, but just the GOP primaries to have this question. Because it wouldn't be binding. It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't do anything legally. But he was saying, we've got our polling suggests that it would win overwhelmingly. I don't remember by what margin he said, but it would be decisive. And he was saying that would be embarrassing. And part of my interview with him was to say, like, to whom, like what, and like who would anyway. And he was explaining, and he gave a good answer. I don't remember enough. I don't want to say, but it was sort of like they wouldn't look cool for the people in Washington or whatever. Like it'd just be awkward. And so
he should have said it'll be inspiring.
Yeah,
and that's what you would hope, right?
Right. So in any event, no, but I mean, he was trying to explain like why is clearly this GOP chairman Matt Rinaldi, in Texas, was quashing this. And so anyway, they had gotten 139,000 signatures, and so the way that the GOP, and there was some thing in Texas law where if you there was some formula about something like the gubernatorial election or whatever. So they got way more signatures than was necessary to get this thing on the primary ballot. And so but the Republicans wouldn't allow it. And again, Daniel was telling me like they can't allow it because it would pass overwhelmingly. They just couldn't let that happen. And so they said, no. And so they had to throw out their signatures saying like, oh, you got some, electronically, it's got to be wet ink signatures. Right. And so that's what they said. And so then the Texas Nationalist Movement sued the GOP, the Texas GOP, saying you can't do that. And then, this article was saying the Texas Supreme Court just isn't taking it up. Right. So that died. And so, that doesn't mean Texas secession won't happen, but I think you're right. And it's part of the goal. And I've had other people on the podcast or whatever and partly why I wrote my thing on it was to say, we want to get these wheels in motion and have debates in public forums and talk about stuff like, well, what do we do with military bases? What about Social Security? If Texas were literally to secede, there's a lot of practical stuff. And you don't want to be figuring that out after the dollar has crashed and cities are on fire. Like that's not when you want to be having those esoteric conversations. You want to know ahead of time, this is what we will do if we ever hit the go code. And I'm just saying, like, it's just even something like getting it on the primary ballot when apparently it would pass overwhelmingly and just people would say, no, we're going to block it. And say, oh, well, if that's illegal, you just sue them. And the Supreme Court not taking the case and explaining why, yes, your lawsuit has no validity. Said, no, we're not taking the case. And it's just, okay, well, all right, good thing we're free. So,
yeah, my only response to that is, again, on the time horizon I'm picturing, I don't expect to get there, but pushing in that direction is just still the right thing to do.
What I'm saying to you, Adam, is Jesus is going to come back before your ideas are going to work. That's all I'm saying.
It's funny, me being the atheist, but you read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago?
I didn't read the whole thing cover to cover, but I read a lot of it, yes.
Well, one of the things that struck me when I read it a handful of years ago is the behavior, as Solzhenitsyn describes it, of the most religious people in those gulags. And just how they wouldn't demean themselves and act against their principles, even though they knew that it was probably going to go harder for them behaving that way. But they did it anyway, because it's the right way to live your life. And when it comes to liberty and libertarianism, I don't push so hard that I'm going to break my back and curse God's name. But I'm going to push in this direction because I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to proselytize to the.
Evangelize.
I gave up on that word. Proselytize to the.
You can't even pronounce the word. You think you're going to get Texas to secede?
No, but if they start shouting about it, and New Hampshire starts shouting about it, maybe 20 years later, like Nye County secedes and then says, "Yeah, do something about it." And like when things start shaking up. It's like I said earlier, a lot of things are in flux. The regime's control is slipping. And when that happens, a lot of things just all of a sudden start being possible. And so I say just keep pushing in that direction and hope for the best. In all of these areas that we've been talking about, do it yourself, preach the good word, and yeah, sure, use politics to the extent that you think it might help on the margin or in a long-term vision.
Speaking of the Free State Project, can I bash them too?
Yeah, go nuts.
Okay. Again, folks, with all that stuff, just to be clear, it's not that Adam's saying try things and I'm saying don't. That's not what we're saying here. Adam is saying try things, and I am saying you can if you want, but let's be realistic about the results. No, I'm actually trying to make a joke there. That yes, for me, do these things because if you think it's the right thing to do, that's why you're doing it, not because you think this by itself is gonna, necessarily bear fruit per se. Okay, but the Free State Project, again, with my theme of awesome idea, I early on wanted to sign up, to sign the thing, and my wife at the time, she was like, well, we don't know what your job's gonna be. She actually was more practical, and I was like, okay, yeah. In other words, you said you don't want to be in a position where you sign your name and then you don't move, right? So for people who don't know, the idea was it was founded in 2001. I think it was Jason Sorens. Is he the guy? Yeah, it was his idea, and they were gonna first, have a. At first, the location was to be determined, and the point was, we're going to get 20,000 libertarians, and we're going to select a location, and we're all going to move there with a 5-year window. Once we hit the 20,000 threshold of people signing this thing saying I'm going to move, and then just think if we had that concentration in a relatively low population area, that we can't change what Washington is going to do. But I mean, can you imagine if we were all just in a block there, either through explicit political means, like we would have all the local representatives and things like the sheriff would know who we are, he might be one of us, that, but also just in general, like if all your neighbors smell marijuana and don't call the cops, then that's effectively as if it's been legalized, right? To use an old example people used to use back when that was a thing. Okay, so that was the idea. And again, I just want to say in terms of the time frame and what the original idea was and how is it proceeding. I'm not criticizing. I'm just making sure people are aware that looking at the Wikipedia thing here. So one thing I do remember is when they picked New Hampshire, there were a bunch of people that thought that was a mistake. And they said, no, New Hampshire's too big because if we only get 20,000 people there, they're going to be diluted. If we had picked some other place that was more, out in the boondocks, that then 20,000 people moving there, they would have had a more presence. But the trade-off was, but New Hampshire's really nice and it'd be nice to live there, So, okay. So anyway, as of February 3rd, 2016, 20,000 people had signed this statement of intent. Okay, and so what they were agreeing to was that within 5 years, the 20,000 people, in other words, you weren't supposed to move. You were signing this thing. It was like an assurance contract that once this thing hits 20,000 names, then we all have 5 years to move, right? So it was realistic. I wasn't saying we're all going to move within 3 months or something. It's realistic people could have jobs. They got to sell their house and whatever. They might have kids in school, but that was the deal. Okay, and so again, February 3rd, 2016, they've got until February 3rd, 2021 to get 20,000 people. And then this Wikipedia article saying, as of May 2022, approximately 6,232 participants have moved there. All right, and they say varies estimate, maybe it's as high as 9,000 because some people didn't do it officially. But the point being, it's not half of what the original goal was supposed to be. And there's other anecdotal thing too that Eric, the leader of it right now, he just tweeted. I don't know if he wants me saying this, but he tweeted a thing saying how he had been stopped. He had flown international. I forget where he was coming back from, and customs stopped him, and they're asking him all about what's this Free State Project? Do you advocate violence or anything like that? And he's like, no. And I was just, of course, trolling as I'm wont to do it, and said, did they show you any Jeremy Coffin tweets in rebuttal? And he was like, no. So anyway, I'm just saying with a lot of this stuff, and this happens a lot where I'll be making some point somewhere and I'll have an asterisk and say, except for Jeremy Coffin. Okay, and so anyway, it's if people don't get the inside jokes, it's not worth bringing up. But my point is just that, this idea. Last thing I'll say on this is I know people that moved there early on, and they left because there were just a bunch of obnoxious libertarians that they just couldn't live there. I'm not saying the whole project is a failure and people are going to get mad or whatever with all this stuff. I know Bitcoin maxis aren't going to like what I said at the beginning with all this stuff. Again, I'm not saying each of these things up. I've just rendered my opinion. Everyone should stop doing that. But I'm saying again, I was one who had to be talked out of putting my name on that list originally because I thought, oh, this is awesome. Like, this is a win-win. Like, you can still do the other stuff and we can all move here. And I'm just saying, in practice, I was surprised that I knew some people who had moved there. They were liberty activists and whatever, and you would think, and they had to leave. And I said, why? And they were like, well, because of these 4 people. And I was like, oh, yeah, I know those people. I could see why you wouldn't want to live down the street from them. So there you go.
To defend the Free State Project, if you ask them, they will point to a bunch of victories legislatively. I think they have a convincing case that they punch way above their weight. They don't traditionally use the Libertarian Party as their vehicle. They use the other ones, and I think they're pretty politically savvy. And again, it's interesting. Like, one of the differences as we're having this conversation, Bob, is you were way more excited than I was early for all these things, and now you're way more deflated, which means it's like an expectations thing. And that doesn't bear on anything. I'm just pointing it out. Because I think you just have to keep plugging away and not, like, if we ever get there, I'll be pleasantly surprised.
Okay. So what you're saying, you're like, yeah, I just never expected libertarians to do anything, and so I'm not disappointed. I couldn't be.
Kind of. That's right. It's a little late, so I'm just going to punt on the last topic because it's way too big. So my closing comment is something like, grab every knob and pull every lever that you can to shrink the power of the state in general and expand the sphere of your own liberty as much as you can. I just joined Spike Cohen's group. You Are the Power.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot to mention that.
Because like he ran for VP in 2020 underneath Joe Jorgensen and immediately decided I can do way more good just helping people in an individual basis free themselves from oppressive government. And he's got just a string of victories under his belt already, and it's real early. So I advise doing things.
Can I real quick, just for people, it's stuff like with child protective services, like really egregious cases where the kid had some medical condition, and then some physician somewhere looked at him and said, "Oh yeah, the parents are abusing the kid," and then the parents can't even get the medical records to like prove that no, this is a medical thing or whatever. And then his group just comes in and they analyze the heck out of it to make sure, yep, we understand the situation, and then they just publicize the facts, and people just start emailing the relevant people, and all of a sudden they do the right thing, because they don't want the scrutiny. So it's just stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think eminent domain is another big one. But the Child Protective Services one is so egregious because every actor in the chain of accusing some parent of being abusive and taking their kid away, every actor in that chain gets paid. They're incentivized to claim abuse even if there's no evidence for it, to the point that you'll have these actors camped out outside of hospitals just looking for something that looks enough like abuse that they can get involved, and their department gets money for it. It's perverse. Anyway, so do things like that. Push on all doors that appear like they might budge, even though they might not work. I don't think they'll work in my lifetime. I just think that's the human condition is to be free, not tyrannized, and so we should all be pushing in that direction.
Okay. Thank you. I don't disagree with anything you just said there. And thank you for remembering Spike. You're right. That I just interviewed him, and it's a travesty that I forgot to bring him up. Maybe it's because I wanted it to be, I was just poo-pooing everything, and that there's no way I can poo-poo that. So that could be. I'm half joking and half serious. Like I wonder, like, oh, geez,
be a tough one to throw stones at. Yeah,
right. Did my subconscious or something shield myself from that one? Okay, so again, I'm Christian. I think in the long run, God works everything to good for those who love Him and that sort of thing. And so I'm optimistic in that respect, but I'm not being facetious or cheeky when I say I do think people who don't have that view and who are like, oh no, I think things are going to be all right, and eventually I don't think you realize what you're up against, or I think you have too high an opinion of humanity, like left to its own devices, put it that way. And so what I will close with is I think the world that my kids are going to be adults in is going to be one where huge multinational corporations have merged with the governments of the world that are much more splintered than, like, the U.S. government. I don't think is going to be as powerful in the year 2050 as it is right now, relative. And it's going to be a more multipolar world where large companies with robots, run by AI and whatever, and drones just all over the place, complete surveillance state. But there will be groups of people that are very savvy, and there'll be like, loose coalitions of people, and they'll have ways of encryption and whatever, and be, off-grid transactions and things to have their like little oases of freedom. And the only analogy I can come up with is like Morpheus's ship in the Matrix movies. And like, yep, they knew what was going on, and they're cool, and they're doing, but I think that's what it's going to be like. And I don't think that's a particularly optimistic picture of the future, even though, there's a lot of cool, oh, wow, he's in a ship that can fly? That's awesome. Yeah, that is cool. But look at where they're flying around to and stuff. So anyway.
I'm confused. I always assumed you were raising your kids to be the next John Connor, not this other movie franchise.
Yeah. So, and I'm just saying, like, given that I think that's the trajectory, I don't see any of these things that we've just covered is going to stop that from being true in the year 2050.
Yes, but this podcast episode will survive, and it will be the seed from which a whole new society is germinated. So fear not.
And this was the point at which Bob angered every single libertarian alive.
That's right. They're forming a mob to come get you.
He brainstormed ahead of time and said, I want to anger every single person. And he knew he couldn't say anything negative about Spike Cohen's project, so he conveniently forgot to bring it up.
Didn't hear you say anything about stuff on Molyneux either. All right, Bob, this was awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, if you care about your business or school or church or organization or self, please go to theswanbrothers.com/cross. Put your name in the field, and some fine, helpful Swan Brother will contact you, see how they can help you out. Go check out thebobmurphyshow.com to see Bob's other episodes without me, which are all sad and gray and dim. And come to my show, Haman Nature. Look for it on YouTube or in your podcast catcher. Use quotes, unless you love Michael Jackson songs. And check out my scribblings at my Substack, hamannature.substack.com. Say one last depressing thing for our audience, if you would, Bob.
I don't need to worry about anyone getting mad at me because no one listens to these episodes anyway.
That was perfect. All right, Bob. We'll see you next time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.